the average woman is exposed to over 100 toxins before even leaving the house. So in the introduction of my book, I go through my wife's routine of just going to bed, waking up, making breakfast, putting on her makeup, getting ready, and playing with our dogs. And the amount of toxins that she's exposed to in that time, it's crazy.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch4Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch4Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch4Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch4Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want. Our guest today is functional medicine practitioner, Dr. Peter Kozlowski. And for those of you who aren't familiar with functional medicine, you're in for a real treat. Dr. Koz practices getting to the root of disease rather than just treating the symptoms, while also addressing mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Makes sense, right? Before authoring the book, Unfunc Your Gut, in which he tackles gut health and the immune system, and his new book, Get the Func Out, where he addresses detoxing from heavy metals, toxic chemicals, and mold, Dr. Kozlowski trained with such luminaries as Dr. Susan Blum, Dr. Mark Hyman, and Dr. Deepak Chopra. But what's also interesting is that the path he took to get where he is was not a straight one, facing some serious adversity along the way. And we are excited to see how some of those experiences informed how he practices medicine today. Welcome, Dr. Koz, to the Switch4Good podcast.
That is an awesome intro. I hope I can live up to it. Thank you guys for having me.
You surely can. We've done a lot of research, and we're very impressed with the work that you're doing and the books that you've written. Can you start off first just telling us a little bit about what is functional medicine and how is the approach of functional medicine different from conventional medicine?
Sure. So anybody that has been to a traditional doctor probably knows the dysfunction of regular medicine. So functional medicine, it just works a little bit better. It is all about the root cause. And so it is the why. Why is someone sick? And as a traditional doctor, so I did regular family practice residency and graduated with that degree. I was taught how to listen to you for a few minutes, figure out what medication you need the most to make your symptoms go away, and then get ready for the next patient. As a functional medicine doctor, I was taught to listen to you for much longer, to plot out your history on a timeline, and to identify sources where disease could be underlying. So I often tell my patients, I'm not going to give you something to feel better. I'm going to figure out what's making you sick and try to get rid of that in order so you feel better. Now, the majority of my practice, I am working with people where disease has already onset. So I work a lot with families of autistic children, autoimmune disease, dementia, high blood pressure, diabetes. And that is what my practice has been. But to me, so 99% of my practice is helping people who are just out of options. They've been to Mayo Clinic, they've been to Cleveland Clinic, they've been to university hospitals, and they're like, you know what, I don't have any other options, so I'm going to just try functional medicine. What my practice should be is preventative medicine. When I do lectures or talks or take questions, a lot of times I'll hear, I'm healthy, I feel good, why should I see you? That's the time to see me. And unfortunately, 1% of my practice is preventative care. And And so when I'm working with somebody who's already had a disease diagnosed, has usually been on more than one medication, then we're trying extra hard to reverse things. So that's kind of the big difference is instead of trying to give you something to feel better, I'm trying to help you figure out why.
You know, as we mentioned in the intro, you've faced some pretty serious adversity along the way. And speaking of root causes, right? Like what is at the genesis or the beginning of people's medical issues that they come to you with? Your root, some of your beginnings, you're the son of parents, both doctors who immigrated from Poland. We also read that you were motivated to become a doc after losing a friend to lupus. You are also a recovering alcoholic. It's a really interesting story in your past, and we're going to go into a lot today to help people fix themselves functionally. But I can't help but be so curious on how your history, right? Your speckled history that's really interesting, but had a lot of tough stuff, has built who you are as a human today, and also as a doctor, and how you interact with patients that come see you who have problems that they want you to solve.
Yeah, I mean, my story has defined me, and I guess I would start with just that. If you would have told me when I went to medical school or even when I started residency that I would be practicing functional medicine, I would have laughed in your face. I would have made fun of, because I was your prototypical like traditional doctor, just full of ego. Like it was just like, I'm God and, listen to me and I have it all figured out. And I've spent all these years in school and reading books and I've passed all these exams. So I know best. And that best would have been just pharmaceutical treatment. And so any doctor in my field in functional medicine, especially when you've started as a traditional MD like I did, everyone that's doing functional medicine has a story, and it's usually that there was some health condition that started that they saw wasn't getting better, right? And and most people it's like a physical disease, like an autoimmune condition. For me, it was my issues with alcohol. So I never thought I had a problem with alcohol until I tried to stop drinking. My culture being from Poland, my family, a lot of alcohol. The college med school was always like work hard, play hard. So it would be study, 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 and then go out and party and then study again. And I thought that was normal because that's what all my friends did. And then when I started residency, I tried to stop drinking. And it wasn't so much that I didn't, like I can not drink because I was never drinking every day anyway, but it was, I don't know how to deal with life. Like when stuff happens, like I don't know how to experience emotions or feelings or like for me, it was either just like getting what I wanted or not getting what I wanted.
Why did you try to stop when you started residency?
Because I was asked to.
Okay.
I had during medical school, I had gotten a DUI. And when I reported that when I was getting a medical license, they basically any doctor that gets a medical license that has that in their past, they ask you usually to meet with some addiction psychiatrists and make sure that you don't have a problem. So what I was offered is I told them I don't have a problem. It was a mistake one time. And they said, sure, but can you be in this year-long monitoring program where we're going to randomly test you for drugs and alcohol? And the testing that they had wasn't just for alcohol. It was for the metabolites of alcohol. So if you drink today, they can still find it in your urine 5 days later. And that broke my pattern of, work all week and then go out on Friday night. And so I was asked to be in that program. And then as soon as I started it, I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't do it. I don't know what to do on Friday night. I don't know what to do when I'm feeling upset or not, or things aren't working out. I don't know how to have fun. I don't know how to be social. It was a struggle. And so I went to a 6-week, like inpatient, like a partial inpatient treatment where it was like therapy from morning to night. And I'm still a friend. This was, it'll be 12 years ago soon. My first therapist, I'm still in touch with her, and she reminds me, like my first day of treatment, of my like first therapy group, I was like pounding my feet into the ground, like stomping my feet like a little kid, like just so mad that I was there and in such denial. And the first part of group therapy was like to identify what you were feeling. And I didn't know how to do that. Like, I growing up, and I mean, my parents hate when I say this, but my belief about myself and most of my patients is that it usually starts with our parents. And for me, part of it is like, they always, well, first of all, that they came to America with nothing. So we had nothing when I was growing up. So basically what I was taught is like survival, like either you're working and making money or you're not. And we never talked about emotions, feelings, none of those things. So the other thing that came out of that is I grew up in like very American neighborhoods in Chicago. And I just never felt like I fit in, even though I had friends and I was popular. Like, but when I would go to my friends' houses, they would eat pizza and cheeseburgers and speak English, and then my friends would come over to my house, and my parents would be speaking Polish, and we'd be eating different foods, and it was just always super awkward for me. And what fixed that immediately was like the first time I drank, and it took away all that insecurity, and it made me confident and not worry about those things that I thought were wrong with me. So this is years of therapy. It helped me kind of figure that out. And so that treatment for me was all about the why. Like, we never really talked about alcohol or like drinking, which was so confusing to me. It was like, why, like going deep into my childhood and all these things. And so that's where I was introduced to this concept of underlying cause. And it was that experience that allowed me to be open to functional medicine. When it was introduced to me, it was like, my life had been changed, and just everything, that ego, I was taught, like, to start working on that ego and start at least be aware of that ego. So that experience was extremely humbling to me, and just taught me that I wasn't like the king of the world and the smartest person in the world. And that, I had faults, and I needed an open mind to heal, and I needed others too.
As a doctor, if someone should come to you and you recognize the signs of alcoholism, dependence on alcohol, or they recognize it, I have two questions. I know that you feel that a lot of illness does come from emotional trauma, or that's one of the tenets of functional medicine. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering what you prescribe, and where does healthy nutrition and lifestyle help us avoid or overcome addiction? And the reason I ask is because when I eat well and take care of my body, my mind is so much more able to cope. And you talked about the fact that you just couldn't cope with life. And I feel, when I'm taking care of myself and eating in a balanced way, sleeping and all that stuff, I just feel like more able to cope, stronger.
It's like more capable.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the nutrition piece is that every process in our body, whether it's your thyroid or whether it's your immune system, your hormones, your ability to detox, is dependent on vitamins and minerals from your diet, right? And so if you're not feeding those processes in your body, then you're not going to be able to detox as well. Your thyroid's not going to function as well. So you're not going to feel well. And some people can hang on like that for a very long time, right? Like people can eat like a fast food standard American diet for many years before disease starts, and our bodies are extremely resilient. But nutrition is our building block for everything. I mean, for every process in our body to function properly, we need the nutrients to support those processes, and we get those from fruits and vegetables in our diets. So the nutrition piece is crucial. And actually, the treatment center that I went to, when I was I took a little break from practicing, but one of the things I did was I went and taught nutrition at the treatment center that I went to. And that's not easy because a lot of people in the treatment center are pretty sick. I mean, it's people coming off of opiates and alcohol. For me, it was alcohol was my thing. But an interesting thing for somebody that's quitting alcohol, especially if it's somebody that's a nightly drinker, is really bad sugar cravings because their bodies, alcohol is a sugar. And so they've been used to getting tons and tons of sugar every night through the alcohol, and then they stop, and then their body's not only withdrawing from alcohol, but they're withdrawing from the sugar. And so it even happened to me. Like my whole life, I had never eaten sweets. And then when I stopped drinking, I found myself starting to eat sweets or wanting to eat sweets. And I learned, I mean, if anybody that's listening to this has these kind of issues, I mean, I learned pretty quickly, at least for somebody that's just just starting recovery, I would rather have them eating some sugar at night. I mean, if it's going to help not pick up the next drink, then I'm all for it. You know, that there has to be a process of getting that alcohol out and the cravings out. And if the little sugar is what someone needs, then I don't say like, no, you can't do that. And then in time, as your body heals and then you can really start focusing on the good food to then support your body. But the issues that I see in myself, I see in my patients all the time. And it's people without alcohol issues. I mean, we all, I can't speak for everybody, but I see myself and a lot of the patients I work with, whether it's an addiction to work or to the internet is something that I see in my patients. I had a patient, and so in my first book, Unfunc Your Gut, I kind of make fun of the internet and what it's like to, how many rabbit holes you can go down and all the things you could convince yourself of that are wrong with you. And I remember once, I think it was 2 years ago, I had a patient that I personally think that sometimes the internet is killing people and that there's so much information out there and you can become so convinced that like you'll never be able to detox or that you're full of heavy metals or that you have candida or all these different things. And people, it becomes their identity, just like somebody with alcohol. So I had a patient once, and it is my belief that specifically like most people know me for gut health. And now I've put out this book about hormones and toxins. With the gut specifically, like the gut will never heal if you're constantly in that sympathetic fight or flight response. So it's not, so I had a patient that my advice for her, she had SIBO and we wanted to treat it. And I was like, if you could just do one thing for the next month, don't go online and read any health stuff, unfollow all your favorite health celebrities and all this stuff. And she stomped her feet the way that I stomped my feet my first day in treatment. I'll never forget it. And so there's different ways that we kind of try to avoid the real underlying issue. But you are right that, I mean, at the center of the functional medicine matrix is mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And I think even in my world of functional medicine, there's a lot of practitioners that forget that, or they haven't worked on that themselves. So they are taking like basically a traditional medicine approach, but just using supplements instead. Like, oh, you have adrenal fatigue, here, buy all these supplements and then you'll be better. Or here, you have candida, so take these supplements and you'll be better. That's not functional medicine. I mean, that's just a Band-Aid, except instead of using a pharmaceutical, you're using a nutraceutical. So I like people to do the digging. Before a patient comes in to see me, they fill out about 40 pages of intake paperwork. And there's always two questions that I look at first. And the first one says, do you have too much stress in your life? Yes or no? And then the second question says, can you manage stress easily? Yes or no? And when someone answers, no, I don't have too much stress, and yes, I manage it easily, that's when I know they're in trouble. I've had one or two patients.
Those are going to be my answers.
Mine was going to be, no, I don't have too much stress, but when I do get it, I don't handle it that well. Tell me, Dr. Koz, why is that? Is that because you don't believe that anyone doesn't have too much stress and is able to handle it well?
Handling it well. I mean, so I've had a handful of people over the years that have proved me wrong on this, that they really were not stressed out and that they were managing it well. But for the most part, I mean, the first step in recovery and like AA is to admit that you have a problem. And so when you don't do that, it's denial. And then, at least from the sobriety standpoint, you'll never get sober if you don't ever admit there's an issue. And yeah, so that's been, especially, I mean, from the last 3 years with the pandemic and all that, the stuff that everybody has gone through from every side of it. Like, I don't believe that there's not too much stress. And even before that, I felt the same way with my patients, that life is hard. Doesn't matter if you're dealing with like the stuff that I deal with or something totally different. Like, life is not easy. So I like to do everything objectively. And so that means that I like to do lab testing. And so whether we talk about the thyroid or the adrenal glands or heavy metals or mold or SIBO or candida or anything, I like to do lab testing. In this new book, one of the chapters, so the first half of the book is about hormones, and there's a different chapter on each different hormone that I work with. And then the last half of the book is the toxins. And so there's a chapter on the adrenal glands, which are known as your stress glands, right? And your adrenal glands, when you're stressed out, that sympathetic nervous response is activated, we release cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And that's one of the hormones you don't want too much of, the other one being insulin. So cortisol is your stress hormone, and we can test that. And I go through that testing, but it is saliva testing. So you spit into a tube morning, midday, afternoon, and nighttime. And your cortisol should follow a bell curve, which is basically like it starts high in the morning and then it kind of has a sharp drop for lunchtime, and then has a slow, steady drop until the evening. So I can see how stressed out you are through that, right? And so I do lots of, I guess I call it unofficial research, but from all the patients I've seen over the years, I look for patterns and I remember things and I look at, what I'm seeing over and over again. So the more that someone tells me that they're stressed, right? So the people that are like, yeah, listen, I've got a lot going on and there's this and there's that, and I'm in therapy but there's this going on, the more normal their cortisol curve looks. So it looks as if they're not stressed because they've accepted it, in my opinion.
Oh, I see. So so their body's handling it.
Yes, they're aware of it. And so their body's adapting to it. the more that someone tells me, no, I don't have any problems, there's no stress, my marriage is good, I don't have financial issues, the worse their cortisol curve looks. And so that objectively kind of backs up my belief. And like I said, this is not for everybody, but I've seen this theme overlying as this being the barrier to so many of my patients healing, because for the people that come to see me, they will go on the strictest diet. They will take as many supplements as we think they need to. They'll do whatever. But for most people, when I ask them to look at, their relationship or their upbringing or their whatever, that's where the red flags go up, and they don't want to do it. Another way, and an interesting way, since I like testing so much, a lot of people come to me for their gut health. And one of the ways that I look at your gut health is through stool testing. Through stool testing, I look at your microbiome. I look at what's growing in your, as I call it, in your garden. So all of us have 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria growing inside of us. And when that bacteria is good, the generic term is like probiotics, right? And so what we look for, and in my analogy that I use to describe your microbiome, is that it's like your own garden. And the plants of your garden are the probiotics. Fiber is the fertilizer of your garden. But what happens to your garden when you don't take care of it is weeds grow. And that is called dysbiosis. And so that's one of the main reasons I do stool testing. But what I'm getting at is that on a stool test, I could actually see how stressed out you are. So we do a culture of your probiotics. And when your probiotics aren't growing, when they're suppressed, and then there's also an immune marker called secretory IgA. When your probiotics are suppressed and your immune response in your gut is stressed or is suppressed as well, that means you're stressed. And so I just had a patient
wait,
yesterday.
Dr. Koz, let me ask you just to clarify that. People are very interested. Our listeners are very interested about the gut. So sure. You say probiotics, those are the good bacteria. But what if it's that they're not eating properly and it's not a psychological thing, but it's actually just that their diet is not good, they're not sleeping as well as they could, and they aren't exercising, which all affect the good bacteria in the gut? So how do you know whether that it's psychological as opposed to lifestyle habits?
There's also, I would say, like, not sleeping well and not exercising are signs of stress. So I would say that it doesn't necessarily have to be an emotional or a spiritual or a mental stress. It could definitely be a physical stress. So it's not perfect. Like, I can't break down what, that if you're typically the 3 probiotics that are suppressed on a stool test are lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and enterococcus. And for anybody that's ever taken a probiotic, basically all of them are made of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. So for it to not grow on a stool test, the main thing that does that is that sympathetic nervous response, which, again, it could be more than just the mental, emotional, spiritual part. That's the part that, we're looking at all of those things, but again, those things are easier for me to get someone to work on. So someone will be like, oh yeah, you're right, I do need to exercise, or yeah, you're right, I do need to sleep more. But it's like, hey, if I'm like, hey, I think you should work with a therapist to kind of dig into this stuff, that's when they're like, no, I'll focus on the sleep and the exercise.
Okay. Yeah. So an imbalance, like a hormonal imbalance, will affect stress, or maybe it's stress affecting a hormonal imbalance. I'm assuming one of the reasons you asked those 2 questions about stress is because it exacerbates almost all the issues or situations that people come in to see you for. I want to hone in on one of these areas, hormone issues, because that's a big part of what your book is about. Just starting out, what are the typical or the hormone issues that you see most commonly when people come to see you, and how do you identify, like what are those questions for people that are listening, maybe trying to get a free session here, because they probably are, because I am. What are those questions?
Yeah, so they're a little bit different for everybody. I mean, again, with the 40 pages, I mean, we're getting info about everything. But
Right.
So I guess just to start with, like the most common hormonal imbalances that I work with, number one by far and away is thyroid disease, and that's usually low thyroid, and that is like Hashimoto's is the most common autoimmune condition. The second thing is adrenal fatigue, and that's what I was talking about with the adrenal glands. The third one that I wrote about is insulin and blood sugar. Now that's something I don't see very often, because most people that come to see me have already worked very much on their diet and they've been very strict, and they're usually not having blood sugar issues. But if I was in a traditional medicine practice, in a regular family practice office, I mean, it'd probably be 70 to 90% of my patients would have blood sugar issues. And then the reproductive hormones. So for women, it's estrogen and progesterone. For men, it's testosterone. Women also make testosterone, just not nearly as much. So I would say like top symptom would be fatigue. Like if someone's dealing with fatigue, then I'm looking at hormones. If there's any kind of imbalances in the menstrual cycle, then that's a sign that we're looking at hormones. Some of the other, like dry skin, dry hair, constipation, anxiety. So that's something that I want to comment on, because this is a great point. The most common condition that I see in premenopausal women is estrogen dominance. And so that's a condition that's not really accepted by traditional doctors. I don't know. They don't really acknowledge it. So like a woman's cycle, when it's like by the book, is 28 days. And the whole point of the cycle is for implantation, to get pregnant, right? And so it's about releasing an egg. And if that egg is fertilized, then pregnancy starts. If the egg is not fertilized, then the cycle starts again. And day one is the first day of bleeding, is the first day of the menstrual cycle when we count it. And the first 15 days, a woman makes estrogen and no progesterone. And starting around day 15, you start making progesterone, and progesterone's your pregnancy hormone. And so you're making progesterone, and then if the egg's fertilized, then you make a lot more. And if you don't, then you stop and you just make estrogen again. So what estrogen dominance is not making enough progesterone in the second half of the cycle. And the other thing that I talk about in the book is it can also be just too much estrogen, which that's part of the connection of hormones and toxins that I make, is that a lot of these toxins mimic estrogen. So something like you're getting out of sunscreen or plastic bottles, when it's getting into your body thinks that that's estrogen, and it's binding estrogen receptors and turning them on. And so you need more progesterone then to balance that out. So I'd say probably 75% of women that come to me, I'm diagnosing with estrogen dominance. And a key thing for anyone listening that's interested is the testing. So testing should be done in the second half of your cycle. And I prefer blood testing. And I would test estradiol, which is your active estrogen premenopause, and progesterone, along with LH and FSH, which are signals from the brain. So I like to get this blood drawn around day 21, typically, of the cycle. And I've heard a lot of patients that have gone to get testing, and I'm like, well, where were you in your cycle? Because your progesterone is 0. And they're like, well, my doctor didn't tell me when to go, so I don't even remember. And I'm like, well, you're either horribly estrogen dominant, or you got your blood drawn on day 3 or 7 of your cycle, and this is totally normal. So we have no clue. But in the main symptoms that I've seen that estrogen dominance presents as is anxiety, poor sleep, low energy, and then it could be heavy periods, irregular period. I mean, all types of stuff like that. It could be fibroids, it could be endometriosis, any kind of the classic kind of conditions that a lot of women deal with. But so I've seen so much of this, and a lot of women I've worked with, they're like, well, I'm doing yoga, I'm doing meditation, I'm going to therapy, I'm talking to people, but like I can't get my anxiety under control. And then I diagnose them with estrogen dominance. And frequently what I do is progesterone replacement in that case. So we'll put them on a hormone replacement. And as soon as we balance the hormones, all that other stuff they're doing starts working a lot better.
What about the deeper reason why they have the estrogen dominance in the first place? Is it the anxiety that made it that way, or is the anxiety and the tiredness come from having the estrogen dominance?
My argument is it's our toxic environment. So that's the other piece of this book is we start getting exposed to toxins before we're even born. Toxins cross the placenta. And so our toxic burden starts before we're even born. And so why are there so many hormonal imbalances being diagnosed more and more and more? Well, my argument is that we've seen this skyrocket over the last 50 years. And the main thing that correlates with that is the amount of toxins we're putting into our environment. And toxins are stored. And so when I say toxins, it can be just about anything, but the main ones that I focus on are lead, mercury, mold, glyphosate, herbicides, pesticides. The average woman is exposed to over 100 toxins before even leaving the house. So in the introduction of my book, I go through my wife's routine of just going to bed, waking up, making breakfast, putting on her makeup, getting ready, and playing with our dogs. And the amount of toxins that she's exposed to in that time, it's crazy. And
right.
So this constant onslaught that we're being put on, toxins, when they start getting stored in our body, one of their favorite places to get stored is in our hormone glands. In general, toxins, any of these ones that I mentioned, they're fat soluble. And so what that means is when we breathe them, eat them, drink them, they will get stored in our fat. Well, every cell in your body is the membrane has fat in it. So these toxins can get stored anywhere, but one of their favorite places to damage is our hormone glands. So the hard part with working with toxins, I mean, there's a lot of difficult things. One of them being that traditional medicine hates this. They won't even acknowledge it. It's not looked at kindly. It even took me a few years of functional medicine practice before I got comfortable with it. And just because of my training as a regular doctor, that it's just so... there's such a negative connotation about it in traditional medicine that it took me some time to get used to it. But once they're attached in the fat, they start causing cell death. And I go through the whole pathway in the book, but basically these toxins are creating acidity that is killing your mitochondria. The mitochondria are dying. You can't make energy, and then your cells die. And eventually that leads to, for like someone like me, I had low testosterone at the age of 32. And I found a bunch of lead in my body. And so through getting rid of that, my testosterone is better now. And so that's one of the reasons. There can be a genetic component to it. There could be the dietary component to it. Like for me, being an immigrant or the son of immigrants, like the biggest way that I saw to fit in growing up was food. I was like, my parents wanted to give me like healthy stuff. And I was like, no, like, let's have pizza for dinner and cheeseburgers and pancakes for breakfast and all this stuff, because I felt like it made me fit in. But even going through medical school, I mean, we don't even really talk about nutrition. Like, I mean, I didn't know anything really about diet besides like, if somebody got diagnosed with diabetes, to send them to the nutritionist at the hospital is about all I knew. And so it could be just that what we call the SAD diet, the standard American diet. Any of these inflammatory things that people deal with, I think can contribute to a hormonal imbalance. And for most women, it's like, somewhere around, it's getting younger and younger. But as a teenager, the periods are heavy. You have to miss school because your periods are heavy. So you go to your doctor and you get put on birth control. And that's a synthetic hormone, which is toxic. But you take that usually most women, until they get married or want to have kids, and then you stop it. And then realize like, wow, my hormones are so out of whack. And that's a very classic story that a lot of women deal with. But it's an extremely common condition. And like I said, and then it goes back to the toxins that can mimic estrogen. So you might not have too much estrogen, but you might have too much toxic exposure, which makes your body think that you have too much estrogen.
I just don't want every single perimenopausal woman to think, oh, I definitely have something else going on besides the fact that I'm premenopausal. Because when we first started on the chatting about the women, you said you see a lot in premenopausal women. And that is a very big drop in progesterone that creates those symptoms, because the first 15 days of the 28 days is estrogen dominant. And then around day 15, the progesterone comes in so that we can prepare the body to be pregnant. But that's what stops in perimenopausal women, right? Is the progesterone, because it's so that is one of the possibilities of why you feel like a funky dog, perimenopausal or premenopausal. You don't necessarily have to have some kind of toxic chemical. That is just a period of time that feels not awesome for a lot of women because their progesterone plummets. I just want to make sure I get that straight, because I feel like everyone, you know what I mean? Because I'm in that space right now, and who knows, I may have toxic in something, but it's also because of the natural hormonal wave.
Yeah, so I was talking about premenopausal, and then getting into that perimenopause. It's definitely, there's changes there, and then again with menopause. So great point.
Okay. So those are normal. And then if it continues, then someone would need to look deeper. Like if it continues past menopause, and they would maybe then tend to look deeper into something else going on.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Thank you. I just wanted to make that clear for everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you mentioned testing for heavy metals, and you've said that if you had your preferences, you would have kids from the age of 3 on get tested for heavy metals, mold, and chemical tests every few years, just so we make sure that by the time we're 50, that we're not just toxic inside. And like you said, so that we come to you earlier rather than when so much damage has already been done. You mentioned you had lead poisoning. I had a friend who had mercury poisoning. Can you share with us a little bit about the detox process from lead and mercury? And then I'd like to go into mold, which is also incredibly common and which you deal with in your book.
Yeah. So I think one clarification, just coming from the traditional medicine background, is I'm not calling it a lead toxic or poisoning or a mercury poisoning. That regular doctors will accept, like a poisoning, like the kids in Flint, Michigan, that they changed the water supply and they had lead poisoning, and they were acutely ill, right? They had like acute nervous system symptoms. What and regular medicine does believe in that. What I was taught in functional medicine and what I practice is this concept of total toxic body burden. And so what that means to me, and the analogy that I like, is that we're all born with a bucket, and we fill that bucket with sugar and bad food and stress and lead and mercury and mold and glyphosate. And eventually that bucket overflows into disease, right? And that's where most people are presenting to me once their bucket's overflowed. And then we're trying to figure out what is in their bucket and what's filling it. So when I talk about like a lead, I guess I would just call it not a poisoning, but a buildup of lead or a buildup of mercury. And I would just say that that's contributing to your total body burden. And so that's very different than a poisoning, because a poisoning, you would feel it, you would know. And that's, I think, another thing when I say that toxins are so bad and so difficult is we don't feel them. So if you're just filling your bucket with just a little bit of all these different toxins, you're not getting symptoms. Like, it's not like, oh, I drink my water out of the sink and there's lead in it, and so I feel a headache, or I'm eating sushi and the fish is full of mercury and I break out in a rash. Like, that's what makes it would make life so much easier for people if you actually had symptoms from these low exposures that you're being exposed to. But the way that it presents is not like, okay, I had sushi, so now I feel sick, or whatever it is like that. But it's, okay, I've been having joint issues and I go to my doctor and they diagnose me with rheumatoid arthritis. And so by the time someone knows that there's a toxin issue, it's usually already too late. And so that's why I would start testing people at a young age. And like I said, and that's because your toxic burden, your bucket starts getting full before you're even born. And so if a woman comes to me pre-pregnancy planning, the first thing I want to do is detox to make sure that that's not crossing the placenta and being passed. So specifically to your question about heavy metals, my preferred route of testing is called pre and post chelation testing. And chelation is a controversial topic. I write about it in the book, and it's the use of a medication to pull and bind toxins out. And so regular medicine, and I quote studies that say that they think it's great. Chelation is a wonderful tool if used properly. But again, they don't like this concept of total body burden. So that to them, that's not using it properly. But it is, so we use this medication because we want to know how many of these metals are built up in your body. So in order to test you properly, in my opinion, we do this pre and post test. And so what that is the pre-test is a urine sample first thing in the morning. You wake up and you pee in a cup. And that tells us your active exposure. Is there something in your environment that is too high in a metal? Like I just had a patient earlier this morning that her tin was high, which I haven't seen before, but she's has well water, and we think it's coming from the well water. So she has tin, and she's going to now test her water to see if that's where it's coming from. Another example I've seen is people eating sushi like 3 times a week or more. They're excreting a good amount of mercury on a just random urine test. But most people test negative. The point of that test is to make sure you're not being exposed right now. But then what I care about is how much of it is in your bucket, how much is built up in your tissues. And so that's where I use a medication like DMSA, which is a chelating medicine. You take this medicine and then you get this big orange jug and you collect your urine for 6 hours afterwards. And what's happening is that medicine is pulling what's stored in your tissues out. And at the end, you collect this jug and then you transfer it to a vial and you send it to the lab. Your pre-test should look identical to your post-test, because there should not be any metals in your body that this medication should pull out. If it's pulling something out, it depends on how high the level is, but usually then we'll want to detox you. And I typically do use chelation therapy to detox someone, which is the use of that medication to pull those metals out. So that is an example of heavy metal testing. And for anybody interested, I get deeper into it, the different medication, the dosing, all of it, in the heavy metal chapter in the book.
I want to ask a question on plastics. A director friend of mine who directed The Cove and The Game Changers is now doing a film on plastics. And all of us, I think, probably listening, are pretty aware of what plastics are doing to planet Earth and the oceans specifically. But this director's name's Louis told me last week, as he was sharing with me this journey of making this film, that each individual adult human consumes a credit card size of plastic each week. And I was pretty shocked by that. And so, I mean, the problem is plastic, why there's so much of it, right, is so convenient and so cheap. So getting it out of our supply system, our supply chain, I mean, that's going to be a tall order. But does plastic negatively affect our hormones? And why is consuming a credit card size of plastic bad every week? Is it bad? It sounds bad.
Yeah, it does sound bad. I haven't heard that statistic before, but it's not surprising. So the way I think that a lot of these toxins have been passed or been allowed to be used is the studies that they do would be just on one individual plastic component. Or the analogy that I give in the book and that I want to use now is the analogy of the use of glyphosate, which comes from Roundup, right? And so Roundup has been used for a long time. And since they started using it, farmers in India and South America, they were saying like, hey, our animals are dying, we're getting sick. And they were just shut down. And then eventually people spraying it started getting sick in America. And so, but the studies that they kept putting out, at least the company that makes it, they argued that this amount of glyphosate was safe. And they were showing studies that proved that. But the whole time, scientists and people against Roundup or glyphosate, they were arguing it's not just the glyphosate, it's all the chemicals in the Roundup mixed together that are making people sick. And they weren't doing studies on all the chemicals mixed together. They were just focusing on the glyphosate because that was the main component. And so that's the analogy that I would make to the body. Like, that amount of plastic, I mean, it's hard to say that that's just to visualize a credit card every week is like, I mean, that's quite the visual of plastic. And it's hard to argue that doesn't make you sick. I don't know how you could, but my argument is that it's not just that, but it's also the fish that you're having for dinner and the stuff that's your couch is sprayed with so it doesn't burn down, and the lead in the air that you're breathing in. And so it's all of, to me, from the clinical standpoint, it's all of these things mixed together that are making people sick.
Right.
But with enough time, it goes back to the same mechanism with these toxins, and is that they're foreign substances. When they attach to our cells, they cause cell death, and they are fat soluble, so they're surrounding all of our cells. So that's, I think, because you could kind of pick any one of these toxins and show, how much of it we're being exposed to, but then it's hard. And they very much want to do that in traditional medicine, is like this equals that, right? Like there's one cause for this disease and there's one cause for this. And so lead equals this, mercury equals this, mold equals that. to me, it's the combination of all these things that we're storing up. And then you throw in the diet, and you throw in stress, and you throw in lack of sleep and lack of exercise. And eventually that overflows into issues.
Okay.
That's the way I would look at it personally.
Tell us about mold, because it's common and it's sneaky. It's so
Yeah.
I worry. I live in an old house. Does it have mold?
Yeah.
It might.
Yeah.
The first thing that I ever learned, or the first thing that I learned at my first environmental medicine conference, which is environmental medicine is like a sub part of functional medicine, that the only treatment for a moldy house is to knock it down. And right away, there's controversy there, because your mold remediators and anybody that works with mold for a living will say, no, we can fix it. We can get rid of it. There's a lot of difficult things about mold. And one of them being that most people don't know that they're being exposed. So most people have no clue that they're being exposed. So I learned very quickly in my career to not ask someone, have you been exposed to mold? But my screening question is, does the home that you live in, or have you ever lived in a home or worked in a building that had water damage? Because water equals mold, usually, the overwhelming majority of the time. So that's my first screening question. And so that's what I try to ask people. Have you ever lived in a house that had water damage, or do you? And so I think that that's a very, very important thing. I don't test everybody for mold. So if someone is pretty adamant that they're like, no, I really don't think I've ever had any exposure to a water damaged building, like, that I lived in or worked in a lot, then I won't test them. Heavy metals are something that I would test everybody for. Glyphosate is something I would test everybody for. But mold, I'm usually looking to hear some kind of history of water damage. And what mold, it releases spores, and spores is how mold replicates. And spores are what cause mold allergies. And so when someone has a mold allergy, they'll know if they walk into a moldy building. They start getting some of those classic allergic symptoms. And your regular doctor, if you go in to your regular doctor and say, hey, I think I'm allergic to mold, they'll test you for that. That's easy. And that's spores. That's the reaction that people's bodies can have to spores. What we're looking at is mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are what mold produces as its defense mechanism. Mycotoxins are what kill things around the mold. Mycotoxins are a lot smaller than spores are. And mycotoxins get into our body, and because they're a defense mechanism and they're meant to cause cell death and kill things around us, they start damaging our cells. And that's how you can create a mold toxicity. Out of all the families that I've worked with where someone had a mold toxicity, a very difficult thing is that not everybody in the house is sick. So out of all the families I've ever worked with that someone had a mold problem, it's almost always one or two people in the house. It's not all 5 family members. So if you had a visit with me and, you came back out of the visit and you're like, hey, the doctor thinks I have mold. A lot of times family members will be like, this doctor's full of crap. Like, how could, you have mold if I'm fine and our kids are fine? And so that makes it very difficult. That it's very, very, very rarely like more than one person in the house is sick. And so another problem with it is that if you're worried, like I have an older house, so, I'm going to call my local mold inspector and have my house tested. The overwhelming majority of mold inspectors they're testing your house for spores. And so they typically test the number of spores outside your house, and then they test the amount of spores inside your house. and the number outside should always be higher because mold is kind of natural in our environment. If the spores are higher in the house, then they'll tell you have a mold problem. A house can have mycotoxins in it and still test negative for spores. So if you were asking me, what should I do? I'm worried about my house. For me, since I'm a clinician, I would order a urine test of your body for mycotoxins. And so we would see, do you have mycotoxins in your body? And then usually if you tested positive, then I would have you do mycotoxin testing of your home. And that is through collecting dust, and typically from like the HVAC filter. And so you collect 3 grams of dust, send it to the lab, and they will test for mycotoxins. And then we can compare the results of your body, which mycotoxins are in your body, and compare it to, is there anything in your house? And that tells us, are you actively being exposed? And that's when we talk about any of these toxins, whether it's metals or glyphosate or mold, the first step is always to stop exposure. So we need to know if you're being exposed, because if I'm trying to detox you, but you're breathing it in every night, then we're just going to be spinning our wheels. So that would be a typical process with me in regards to like if you came in. And so symptoms, if there's any kind of immune issues, chronic fatigue, sinusitis, nervous system issues, reproductive hormonal issues. If you come in with anything like that, then and there's a history of some kind of exposure to water damaged building, I'm going to recommend you test for mold.
Mold's everywhere outside. You can see it growing up the tree. You can see it in the mushroom patch. Why do we know why it's a problem for humans?
And not everybody. And so a lot of humans can live in mold and not get sick, at least for a very long time. Oh. Okay. I don't know if we've done something to change the mold. That's a great question, and something that I want to dig into more. I would argue that part of it is what we've done to our bodies and how inflamed our bodies are. Mm-hmm. And that makes us more susceptible. It's eating all these genetically modified foods. It's eating all this sugar. It's not sleeping enough. It's not exercising. It's having gut issues. It's having other toxins and this, how inflamed we're living, I think probably has made us more susceptible to exposure causing issues. That would be my guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Supplements. I want to ask a question about supplements. I only take 4, which is a multi, a D, a B12, and a magnesium. And I understand functional medicine doctors prescribe quite a few supplements. And I have always been concerned about supplements because they're unregulated. And so how does somebody know what supplements to get, like that they're not going to be full of fillers that are unnecessary or harmful, or that they might not even have what they say they have in them? How do we go about finding good supplements, and what would you recommend are the base supplements that someone should take, especially since both Dotsie and I are plant-based and a lot of our listeners are? Keep that in mind with your recommendations.
Sure. It's interesting that you say that, and that is like a stigma that people have about functional medicine, is that we're putting people on a ton of supplements. I've honestly done the opposite over the years. I find myself taking people off of most of their supplements. I may be unique in my functional medicine little world that I'm doing that, but I think that people are, again, too much information out there, too much marketing. And so they're being convinced that they need this and they need that. And then, my question is I'm like, if you're taking these 25 supplements and spending all this money every month, Like, why are you still coming in to see me? Like, I once had a patient that came into my office with 2 suitcases full of supplements that she was taking.
Wow.
And I mean, it was wild. I personally think that things should be done through diet. And so I do use supplements, but I use them as short as possible. So for example, like a multivitamin, I recommend using it as needed. And so what that means is if I'm getting 9 to 12 servings of vegetables and fruit a day, I don't need to take my multivitamin. I'm getting lots of nutrition. If I'm traveling and I'm eating airport food and I'm, road tripping and getting something at the gas station, I'm going to take my multivitamin because I'm not getting a lot of nutrition. So that's one, that multivitamin I believe in using as needed. For someone that is plant-based, I recommend 3 that someone should be on, and they are vitamin D, iron, and a B12 or a B complex. Those are 3 that's for somebody that's plant-based. Those are the 3 that I would be taking. I like, if I were to pick so if there's one that I've found that everybody should be taking, it is vitamin D. And my first practice when I left residency was in Florida, the Sunshine State. We learned we get vitamin D from the sun. And so I went down there assuming that everybody would have great vitamin D levels because there's all this sun. And I found that even there, people that weren't supplementing, doesn't matter what your diet was, people that weren't supplementing vitamin D usually weren't at an optimal range. So that's one that I found that pretty much everybody needs to take. My second one, and I don't know that I would even put everybody on it, is usually an omega-3. I have typically used fish oil. Obviously, if somebody is, vegan, they're not going to take a fish oil. So then there's like flaxseed oil or chia seed oil or things like that. But typically an omega-3, EPA, DHA specifically, 1,000 milligrams a day. But those are really
or
the
an algae
only
oil where the fish get
there
it
you
from.
go, or an algae oil. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So those are really the only 2 that I would have somebody on usually, and then use a multivitamin as needed. And then, like I said, if my advice for someone that's plant-based is iron, vitamin D, and B12. But yeah, I mean, a lot of patients that come to me and I'm taking off of their supplements, they get uncomfortable because they're like, well, this doctor's saying you need to take this and that. And so for me, typically an initial visit does involve a lot of testing. And so I will test, your metabolism and your vitamin levels and see, and then objectively show you like, hey, you do need a B complex, or you really should be taking iron. But just blindly, I think that they are overprescribed. And so where to find a good one? Unfortunately, it's the main way that you can kind of guarantee that you're getting something of good quality is a lot of these companies will legally stand behind their products. So if a third party comes in and tests their product and it doesn't have the 5,000 IUs of vitamin D that it says it does, you can take legal action against them. So they're legally standing behind their products. Most of these companies, to my knowledge, you can only buy them through a physician prescription, or so through like a physician account. Like they set up relationships with physicians and practitioners, and then you can get them through us. But just walking into, Whole Foods or whatever, any kind of supplement store, you're right. It is the Wild West in regard to like, you have no idea what you're taking. And even what makes it even worse is like some of these known brands, from a study that I've seen, is that there's companies from China or India or wherever that will print even the same label that a company that you trust and then sell it on Amazon, and you think you're buying like a good company and it's still fake. So it's tough. It's dangerous. And I only use them as needed. So, I mean, if I'm treating somebody for SIBO or dysbiosis or candida or mold or heavy metals, then yeah, I'm using supplements, but we're only using them as long as it takes to get the metals out of your body, or as long as it takes your gut to heal. I'm not putting people on 10, 5, 30 things that's the answer. And it's honestly kind of one of my pet peeves in the alternative medicine world, is that it does have this stigma that you're like, oh, you're going to see a functional medicine doctor, you're going to end up with a suitcase full of supplements. Yeah. I don't think it should be that way, but
yeah. Well, you said something that's just the critical point of, I think everything you were just saying is to get tested and a blood test, for D and iron and to look at those. Because as you well know, too much iron will oxidize, which is, almost more dangerous than low iron. And I've been plant-based for 12 years and had consistent high iron. So it just, obviously lentils, potatoes, spinach, cannellini beans, even tofu, like there's a lot of iron in a lot of the plant foods. And so I was, as an athlete, was taking an iron supplement, but haven't in the 12 years because it's consistently high. So such a good point. People go get a blood test before you just start, tossing in the D and the iron and, see where you are.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Thanks for making that point.
So where can people find your book, Unfunc Your Gut, and get the funk out? And where can they learn more about you and even maybe see you? I don't know what the regulations are. You have offices in Montana and Chicago, Bozeman, Montana, and Chicago, Illinois, right?
Yes. My website is the best way to get a hold of me. doc-koz.com, doc-koz.com. My books are on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Your local bookstore can order it. They're probably not going to have it in print, but they can probably get it within a couple days. Both titles are spelled Func. And that comes from a saying that I used to have at my practice, or I guess I still do, that we put the funk in functional medicine. And so that's where the titles come from, Unfunc and Get the Funk Out with a C. But yeah, those are, my website is the best way to get a hold of me. And I'm on social media. I'm not very good at it. But I have doc_Koz on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page that's just my name, Peter Kozlowski, MD. And so those are places where people can reach out and get a hold of me. But for anybody interested in functional medicine, there's a spectrum even within the functional medicine world. And for me, I got very lucky to train with some of the people that started this field and made functional medicine what it is. And so I'm very particular to how it should be done. And it should always start with diet and gut health and toxins. And so that's what I share in my books. The feedback I've gotten is just, even if people don't come see me, they say, I felt way more prepared for my functional medicine visit. I knew what questions to ask. I knew what lab testing to look for, et cetera. There's different ways to go about doing it. And so I share, what I was taught and then what I've learned over the years. But that's the way to get a hold of me.
And can people who live in other states see you, make an appointment with you?
So they have to be located in Illinois or Montana.
Got it. Okay.
By the state laws.
So they'll have to learn from your books.
Yeah. And this podcast. You were fantastic. I really enjoyed every second.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you guys.
Until next time. Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switch4good.org. That's podcast@switch4good.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the Switch for Good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch for Good. This is the future.